Okay, so welcome everybody. This is the second session of this week's conference, and this is the keynote session on Wellbeing and Bridge, and it will be followed by a book launch of Bridge at the Top, which is published by Masterpoint Press, and we have the publisher Ray Lee with us for that session, and also world champions Jill Levin and Chip Martell. But for the first part of this session, we have Professor Seligman, who's going to speak for about 45 minutes, and then we're going to have a Q&A after that. And for this Q&A, we would ask you, whilst Martin's talking, please put your questions and comments into the chat. And then when he's finished, we will ask some of you if you would like to turn your mic on and your camera on and ask Martin the question that you typed in the chat. If you don't want to ask your own question you would rather I ask it on your behalf, then I'm happy to do that. Just let us know whether you want to deliver it or whether you want us to deliver it. So I'm delighted to introduce Professor Martin Seligman, who is giving our keynote address for this Bridging Academia, Policy and Practice conference. Martin is Professor of Psychology and Director of the Positive Psychology Center at the University of Pennsylvania in the United States. So Professor Seligman is world renowned for his work on the study of positive mental health. His academic career began, though, with the groundbreaking theory of learned helplessness. And he's authored more than 30 books on motivation and learning. He's also led the movement for positive psychology, and he describes his theory of happiness in his book from 2002, Authentic Happiness, and his theory of well-being in Flourish in 2011. His most recent book, The Hope Circuit, A Psychologist's Journey from Helplessness to Optimism, was published in 2018. Professor Seligman's passion is bridge. He is a lifelong bridge player. He's winner of more than 50 regional championships, and he's a Platinum Life Master. This weekend, he has just won a regional online tournament, so he came first out of 4,500 participants. So congratulations for your weekend win, Martin. And what we're very excited today to hear how he's going to bring together the two key aspects of his life, his theory of well-being and his passion for bridge. And we're very honoured because this is the first time that Martin's going to be talking about linking his PERMA framework to bridge. So thank you, Martin. We're very much looking forward to your talk.
Well, thank you, Samantha. This is a privilege for me. As Samantha said, I've never had a chance to talk about my two great passions in life in the same talk and to try to make some sense integrating the two of them. My two passions are competitive bridge and psychology. And the audience, I understand, is about 50% psychologists and about 50% bridge players. So it means that I'll have to spend a little bit of time introducing the bridge players to positive psychology and trying to introduce the positive psychologists to bridge, which is actually a much harder task. So first, there's a question of why should you bother listening to me in the first place, since I'm certainly not among the world's best bridge players. And so I'll tell you my qualifications as frankly as I can. I've worked for almost 60 years on human motivation, on the question of why we do what we do. And that, as I'll explain in a bit, evolved in the last 25 years into the discipline of positive psychology. That is, what positive things do humans choose to do? In bridge, I've been playing since I was around 8 years old. And after almost 70 years of playing, I have made it to the level of a competent client. As Chip Martell's partner, Marty Fleischer, once said to me, I've become annoyingly competent. So that's about the level of my bridge. I almost turned pro at age 21, in fact. So I was the captain of my undergraduate team at Princeton, and we were the the national champions. And at that point, Mark Blumenthal, who was the captain of Penn's bridge team, asked me to turn pro with him. And I somehow knew that I could never be good enough in bridge to sparkle at the kind of level that Mark did indeed. And I chose to do psychology. In some ways, when I contrast my great bridge playing friends, Chip is one of them, people like Paul Soloway and Jeff Mextroth, they're naturals. The cards just fly off their hands. I was never a natural. It was always sweating for me. I would go into a tank and usually come out with the wrong answer. Unlike good tankers like Eric Rodwell, who when they go into a tank, come out with the right answer. Tanks don't do me any good. I spend I should say, in psychology, I've always been a natural. In the same way that the cards fly off Jeff Mextroth's hands, I very often in psychological theory just know what's going on without knowing why. And so that was a lot of the reason I chose to become a psychologist full-time rather than a bridge player. But I should say, in my life, I've spent as much time playing bridge as doing psychology, and particularly in the last 16 months, where we're all under house arrest, because as I'll talk about in a bit, online bridge is so wonderful for me that I find myself playing 4 to 6 hours a day. And I think in the last year and a half, I've spent more time playing bridge than I have doing psychology. So you should listen to me because I really do know a fair amount about human motivation, and you should discount what I say about bridge because I'm really not all that good. But let me go to the meat of the talk and introduce positive psychology to the bridge players who are listening. Freud and Schopenhauer told us that the best we could ever do in life was not to be miserable, to hold our suffering to as near as zero as possible. And about 30 years ago, when I was elected president of the American Psychological Association, that, by the way, is an association almost identical in size to the ACBL and also filled with 160,000 squabbling psychologists in a way that the 160,000 squabbling bridge players make up the ACBL. When I was president of the American Psychological Association, it's the job of presidents to have an initiative, that is to do something other than just sit there. And when I thought about Freud and Schopenhauer and this notion that the best we could ever do in life was to hold our suffering to zero, that really seemed to me half-baked. And that is, it seemed to me that even though psychologists didn't measure it, there was a lot to life over and above zero. And the theme of positive psychology is that this notion that all there is in life and the best you can ever do, and this will apply to bridge, is to not be miserable, I think is empirically false. I think it's morally insidious, and I think it's a personal and political dead end. And that's because there's not only the relief of misery in life, but there's having a good life. There's the question not just of what cripples life, but of what makes life worth living. And the reduction of suffering to near zero is not something that makes life worth living. And so almost 30 years ago, positive psychology began, and it suggested that we could measure well-being, and I'll define that in a moment. We could build well-being, and we could use well-being to buffer against mental illness. Now, let me just expand on this a little bit before I start talking about Bridge. If 30 years ago I had come to you and suggested that it was a plausible personal goal to be happier in life, to have more well-being, you really shouldn't have paid attention. And that's because all of the measurements that we had were of ill-being. We measured schizophrenia and alcoholism and depression and the like, but we didn't measure happiness or meaning or enjoyment. Secondly, all of our interventions were about relieving suffering. We didn't have interventions that were designed toward building the positive. And there was no theory of happiness and well-being. And that's what's changed in psychology. So in psychology, we can now measure your level of happiness, your measure of well-being, about as well as we can measure anxiety or schizophrenia or depression. And for those of you who want to know how happy you are, I have a free website that I think about 6 million people have registered at. It has all the tests of happiness and well-being. It's called AuthenticHappiness, one word, .org, AuthenticHappiness.org. And if you want to know how happy you are or what your sense of humor is relative to British women, it's got all the tests of that and the norms. And the validity of these tests is psychometrically just as respectable as the measurements of depression and of anxiety. In addition to measurement, we now have interventions that reliably build happiness, not just relieve suffering. So in fact, we have tested very many interventions using the gold standard of random assignment placebo-controlled testing, and we find there are about a dozen that reliably make you happier and produce well-being. And finally, we have a theory of well-being, and that's what I'm going to present now and then apply it to Bridge. So let me tell you what my theory of well-being is. It's a theory of what do free people who are not suffering and not oppressed choose to do. And I think there are 5 elements. And I'm going to talk in a moment about why do you play Bridge. So as I go through each of these 5 elements, begin to ask yourself, which of these apply to you when you play Bridge? The acronym for the theory is PERMA, P-E-R-M-A. So these are the 5 pillars of positive psychology. These are the 5 things that positive psychologists measure, and these are the 5 things that positive psychologists build. The first one, P, is pleasure, happiness, subjective well-being. Your feeling state at the time. Positive emotion is the P. And you might ask, well, why does positive psychology just not end here? Why is it only about how you're feeling? And the answer to that is that how you feel, the amount of pleasure, the amount of happiness you have in life is about 50% genetic. It's not very easy to push around. So I know some tricks for upping your subjective well-being by between 5 and 15%. But if anyone tells you they can make a cheerleader out of a curmudgeon, hold on to your wallet. So positive emotion is not that changeable. And in fact, 50% of the world right now is grumpy and not happy. We call them low positive affectives. I am indeed in that 50%. And my observation of bridge players generally is I'd say about 70% of bridge players are low positive affectives. Introverts tend to be low positive affectives. Introverts tend to be bridge players. Extroverts tend to have a lot of high positive emotion. So that's P. And I want you to be asking yourself right now, when you play bridge, are you playing bridge in order to feel pleasure? Ask yourself that. The second pillar, the E, is engagement. Engagement is when time stops for you, when you're one with the music, when you're completely at home, when you're in flow. And indeed, engagement is manifested by flow. Mike Csikszentmihalyi is the leader in that field. Interestingly, being in flow, time stopping for you, is not an emotion. So indeed, when we stop people who are in flow and ask them what they are feeling, they say nothing. After they say, oh, that was great, dancing was great, but during dancing or singing or playing bridge, if you're in flow, you don't feel anything. And the reason for that is the kind of attention that's required to be in flow, we believe parasitizes and uses up cognition and emotion. So P is positive emotion, E is engagement. Ask yourself now about bridge. Do you play bridge to be in flow? Are you in flow when you play bridge? And this doesn't mean continually. So being in flow for 10% of the time is extraordinary. But are you an E person in bridge? The third element in PERMA, the third element that free people choose, is relationships. We are, in many ways, like wasps and termites and ants. We are creatures of relationships. We've evolved to be part of a hive, and we've evolved to seek out relationships, even if they bring us no pleasure and bring us no engagement. Now, many of you play bridge for relationships, the drinks afterwards, the fact that unlike chess, it's a social game. So ask yourself the extent to which you play bridge for the sake of relationships. The fourth category is M, P-E-R-M, and that's meaning, mattering, and purpose. Let me just say something about what those terms mean. Meaning is belonging to and serving something you think is bigger than you are. Mattering is if you vanished all of a sudden, would that make a difference in the world? I don't think there are many people who play bridge for M, for meaning. And indeed, often as I sit here playing bridge 6 hours a day, I'm wondering if I'm just fidgeting until we die. And the final element of PERMA is A, and that's achievement, accomplishment, mastery. And that's an element that people can choose, even if it brings no pleasure, no engagement, no relationships, and no meaning and purpose. And there are a lot of people who choose achievement as their main motivator in life. So ask yourself now, which of these five are the reasons you play bridge? Is it because it brings you pleasure? Do you feel conscious happiness when you play bridge? By the way, I don't, but I'm a low positive affective. The only time I really feel anything is feeling awful when I make a mistake, or at the end of the tournament, if we win and I played well, winning pretty as opposed to winning ugly, then I do feel happiness for about 30 seconds. So I'm not a P person. I am partly an engagement person, and that is I am in flow a good deal of the time when I'm playing bridge, but that is a dangerous state to be in. And I've noticed in playing against people like Zia, they try to put you in the state of flow. They try to turn off the alarm system so you don't think anything's up. But indeed, when you're playing bridge routinely and well, I'm in flow. And about 10% of the time I'm playing bridge, I'm in flow, but it's dangerous. And that is, you have an alarm system to drive you out of flow and say, hey, this is not a routine hand. You should not be in flow here. And some of the very great players, as I said, people like Zia, try to lull you into staying in flow. Third element, relationships. I don't play bridge for relationships at all. I have a wonderful family. I have a great wife. I have wonderful students. And unlike many of you, because I'm hard of hearing, I don't do postmortems afterwards with my partners, except in writing sometimes. And I don't enjoy going to dinner or drinking with my partners and opponents, largely because I'm hard of hearing, but also because I'm an introvert, as many of you are. The fourth element, meaning and purpose. I don't think this applies to me in bridge. I think there are some people, Samantha, I think, is one of them, who is deriving meaning, being part of something larger here by studying bridge. But Samantha is rare, someone who derives meaning being part of something larger from bridge. And finally, the big category for most bridge players is achievement. Accomplishment, mastery, and I should say winning. And I'll say more about winning when I talk about cheating later on and the divorce between winning and achievement. So at this point, you should be have categorized yourself, adding up to 100%, if you will. Which of these 5 reasons do you play bridge? For me, it's doing something really well. I think that's the motivation, and growing as I'm doing it. So I now want to talk about my life in bridge, and in particular about being a client in bridge. So about 35 years ago, there was a beautiful woman I was pursuing. This was before my marriage, and she told me I was the worst bridge player she had played with in 20 years. Well, she had been married to a world champion for the 20 years. So I called up Paul Soloway at the time, and I said, Paul, would you teach me how to play bridge? I think I was almost a life master at that point, but I was a terrible bridge player, and I don't think I learned to play bridge until well after being a life master. And that started a lifelong, more than a hobby with me. It's playing with people who make almost no mistakes. And that is so beautiful for me, to play with partners who almost make no mistakes. When you're sitting there thinking, shift to a club, damn it. They always shift to a club. And that is very beautiful. And so partnering someone who's playing almost perfectly and having them teach me and tolerate my mistakes and try to make me better has been my life as a client for almost 30 years. So I started playing with Paul Soloway. I played with Paul for almost a decade. he's a complete natural. He yelled and screamed at me all the time, and I just couldn't take it anymore. So I shifted to Eric Rodwell, and that was a great pleasure. Eric, the most he ever said negative was, "Well, you made the contract, didn't you?" And it was great playing with Eric. Wonderful demeanor at the table, but he takes all the time. He thinks, and there's no time left for you. Not that I do anything with my thinking. And after Eric, I've played for the last decade with Mark Lair, and then importantly, in the last couple of years, I've begun to play with non-Americans, and I want to talk about that when I talk about the future of bridge. So right now, I'm missing out on the Super Cup. My team, which is 4 Polish players, and I are in the Super Cup right now, and I've been playing with Martin Lesniewski, with Mikhail Kwiecien, I probably pronounced it wrong, and then I've had the pleasure of playing with David Bakshi and with Boya Brogelund, and all of them have been great teachers. And in fact, I've improved, and I've improved a great deal. My bridge is better. I make fewer mistakes. I still don't try to do anything creative at the bridge table. When you're playing with people like Lair or Bakshi or Boya, they'll be creative enough, but bridge, for the most part, is not making a mistake. Once in a while, you see something creative, like Stevie Weinstein's bluffing a void to make that winning Grand Slam in the Vanderbilt almost 5 years ago. But bridge is a game of making as few mistakes as possible. And interestingly, as a client, I always was trying to up my game and play more and more against stiffer and stiffer competition. And so in many ways, I've won less and less in life, because now my joy is playing against the best competition in the world. And for many years, I was embarrassed playing against them. But now, if I just try not to make errors, I don't get embarrassed very often. And I want to say something about the expense of that. You may think this is a very expensive thing to do, and only rich people can do it. Well, I'm not a rich person at all. I earn my money by giving speeches and by teaching and writing books. I'm probably the poorest in the sense of wealth of all the major clients in the world. And I spend about as much on bridge a year as many of you spend on grooming. I don't buy new clothes at all. But it is a hobby. It's not a hobby for me. It really is a vocation that's not fantastically expensive. And for those of you who feel beauty in bridge and want to learn and get better, it's worth the money, which is not enormous. Even the great bridge players don't charge a huge amount to play with them. I urge you to do it. If you're on the borderline about doing it, try it. Ask one of these people like Bakshi or Boya or Lesniewski to play with you and see what happens. For the last half of my talk, I want to give you various thoughts on the game of bridge today. And some of this will be relevant, and even the psychologists who are not bridge players will get something out of it. So I'm a cognitive psychologist. I'm very interested in what kind of mentation occurs during bridge. And this has become particularly acute for me at age 78 as I notice aging, and I notice the inevitable deteriorations in memory and in processing speed, which are unavoidable. They're very well documented. And there are two categories of cognitions that are highly relevant to bridge. And I'll call them automatic versus deliberative. For those of you who are connoisseurs, Danny Kahneman's fine book, Thinking Fast and Slow, is about this. Type 1 thinking is automatic, intuitive thinking, takes no effort. The cards just fly off your hands, versus deliberative, in which you go into a tank and you try to calculate the probabilities and you go through an entire hand. Now, very importantly, a lot of aging and maturation is getting more and more stuff on automatic. So one thing that's happened to me, 30 years ago when I started playing with Soloway, I was a very slow bridge player, painfully slow. The opponents hated playing against me. And I've now become a very fast bridge player, not as fast as Alan Sontag, but still fast. And that's because 90% of bridge is on automatic for me. I don't have to deliberate about it. I just do it. When I talk about naturals like Soloway and Mextroth, 99%, Hammond is another one, 99% of their bridge is on automatic. Now, interestingly, I work quite a bit on creativity, and I had the privilege for 4 years of doing weekends in 11 different fields with the most creative people in the world: mathematicians, physicists, musicians, psychologists. Stevie Weinstein was even one of them. We did a little bit of bridge. I picked Stevie because he was a polymath, and we did a weekend of polymaths. What we heard from the most creative people in the world was the tension between automatic and deliberative. So people who had won Nobel Prizes, one of them, example, a biophysicist who had spent his life working on how biological systems make sense of random motion. He had this intuition at age 25 of a pudding, a jello that was vibrating. He had this vision, and it would recruit biscuits to stiffen it up. That was the automatic part. And then he spent the next 30 years of his life moving it into the deliberative phase and working out the mathematics of it. Indeed, that turns out to be how biological systems make sense out of Brownian motion. In bridge, we have a lot on automatic. I'd say I have about 90%, and then 10% on deliberative when we go into a tank. And the very nice thing about the huge amount we have on automatic as we age is I'm going to be able to play bridge well into my dementia. That is, I have so much on automatic that I'll be able to play competent but not outstanding bridge with almost no memory because so much is on automatic. Interestingly, I looked at Stevie Weinstein's brain. This is a project called Weinstein's Brain. And Zach Grossack and I designed a set of automatic problems in bridge and deliberative problems in bridge. And we did the same thing in poker: automatic poker hands and deliberative poker hands. And we wanted to know what part of the brain is activated under these conditions. And so We put Stevie Weinstein in the fMRI machine, and we did the same thing with Adam Kaplan. We wanted to take a 20-year-old prodigy as well as a 50-year-old prodigy and look at their brains. And not much showed up, I must say. But it seems to me, for people like Samantha, and as I'll talk about Marek Malisa in a minute, that this question of where in the brain automatic and where deliberative is, Bridge is a great model for finding that out. And I want to talk just a bit about Marek Malisa's work on dementia. Now, people over the years have said, as we age, it's good to play bridge. It keeps us going. It exercises our cognition. Lose it or use it seems to be the most important rule of thumb, both for mental states and for physical states. And so it was often thought that playing bridge might be good for dementia. But Marek in Poland has been looking at this systematically. And he has preliminary work in which he takes people who are dementing quite severely, so severely enough they can barely do arithmetic, and he teaches them bridge. And his preliminary work is that this delays and perhaps reverses dementia. This is a fascinating work. I know Samantha's interested in it, and I think it's very much worth supporting, both as for bridge, but for the importance of countering dementia. At this point, if anyone tells you they can do anything about dementia, drugs, etc., hold on to your wallet. Basically, you can get 30% momentary increases in cognitive performance from demented people by giving them candy. And that's about the best that any drug has been able to do. So the bottom line of what I just wanted to say is one of the great things about bridge is we can play it until we die. And the more of it we have on automatic, the better we can do. So people like Bob Hammond and Jeff Mextroff will be able to play bridge to the very end, since so much of their bridge is on automatic. I now want to turn to one of the disturbing facts of modern bridge, and that's the cheating scandal. And I want to comment psychologically about what we know about cheating at bridge. Indeed, on Bridge Winners about 5 years ago, I asked the question, why do great players cheat at bridge? And it is clear some of them do. And I got about 300 answers. And I'm going to summarize what I think of this now. I think great players cheat at bridge. It's an issue of an issue of achievement, and an issue of accomplishment. Now, I want to tell you something about the history of work on accomplishment. In fact, the ancient history. So for those of you who remember your Homer, motivation in ancient Greece before Socrates was about glory. The Greek word is kleos. So indeed, the main motivation for the heroes of the Iliad and the Odyssey and many of the tragedies was kleos, glory. And for kleos, that's in the eyes of other people. A revolution occurred in psychology about 400 BC, and that was Socrates. And Socrates subverted Athenian youth and was executed justly for it, because he said that kleos was not the reason that you wanted to move in life. Arete, excellence, was the reason. So Socrates moved kleos from glory in other people to excellence, which is a state of mind. Now, if you think about cheating at bridge, this is a kleos matter for the most part. It's achievement. You can't cheat at bridge and have arete. You can only have kleos. So if you know you're cheating, arete is absent. And indeed, there are many forms of achievement. One is winning, another is money. A friend of one of the people who seems to have been convicted of cheating told me that he had made $14 million being a bridge professional and the like. So we know then, if it's kleos, we know about punishment. We know what we should do with cheaters. And that is, we want to do anti-kleos punishment. And anti-kleos punishment is of two forms. One is disgrace in the eyes of the other bridge players, and the other is to undercut the money they make. So that's what I want to say about cheating. It's a form of striving for kleos, and it can be stopped by disgrace. And so we want to thank people like Boya Brugeland for making this a much better game, and they're doing it in just the right way by undercutting kleos. Next to the last thing I want to say is about the future of bridge, electronic versus face-to-face. Now, for me, it's going to be electronic. I was playing electronically from the very beginning of OK Bridge, and for me, the quality of bridge, as I'll say in a moment, is extremely high. I get to stay home with my family. I don't have to get on airplanes and travel and the like. And for an introvert like me, face-to-face bridge is a strain. It calls on qualities I don't have and I don't like. But introverts are very good on electronic bridge. It's cleaner, less cheating, I believe, than face-to-face bridge, particularly if we implement some of the new suggestions about how to make it almost perfectly clean. Another advantage of electronic bridge, it creates a data bank to call on. So you really can ask the question, which no one had ever statistically done before, if a major suit slam is 50-50, should you bid it? If a minor suit slam is 50-50, should you bid it? You can get a data bank big enough to answer a question like that. Another minor part, face-to-face bridge is still septic, and that is we're going to have dangers of infection for a long time to come. Another great advantage of electronic bridge is practice. So many of you who have been on BBO know that you can get your favorite partner from anywhere in the world and you can practice. You can select the minor suit slam hands and spend a whole day working on them. When Ishmael Del Monte got me playing Gazili, Mark Lair and I played 2,000 Gazili hands, and we learned it by playing Gazili over and over again. And it takes about 2,000 hands in order to do it. And you can do it. You can set the hands up to practice a system. Electronic bridge is international, not just American, not just local. And that's a great boon for me, as I say it. And as much as I'm wedded to America and am friendly with so many of the American pros, there are great pros all over the world to play with. And I've been having a wonderful time playing with the Polish pros. And so national and local and regional bridge will die. We don't need the ACBL anymore. We don't need regional bridge. We don't need the accident of co-location. You can find wonderful partners all over the world. And the final thing about the future of the game is progress. So as in science, I'm very interested in progress in bridge. Bidding systems have gotten much better in my lifetime. And playing electronically, allowing any conventions that occur, forcing pass and the like, is how Darwinian selection of bidding systems occur. And so by playing electronic bridge, allowing every convention, bridge will progress. Finally, I want to talk about, just for a closing moment, about the best advice I've ever had in bridge. There are 3 pieces of advice that I've had that have served me well and have moved me from being thoroughly mediocre to annoyingly adequate. The first is Eric Rodwell's, when in doubt, bid what you think you can make. You often find yourself at the table not knowing what to do next and not knowing if this is a Q-bid situation or a Roman key card. When in doubt, when you're feeling that emotion, just bid what you think you can make. That's the first piece of advice. The second piece of advice came from Jeff Eichengreen, and it's about match points. And it has improved my match point game enormously. Underbid and overplay. Match points is a game of underbidding, not overbidding. Underbid and overplay. And the final piece of advice came from Chris Compton, and it's a great advantage of practice, and that is it doesn't matter what system you play. What matters is knowing what system you play, and that's the importance of practice. But I have to say that none of these pieces of advice are nearly as good as the following advice, which I pass on to you, which is never eat at a place called Mom's, never play poker with someone named Doc, and never sleep with someone who has more troubles than you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. That was fantastic. I think those that can, I think we should give Martin a magnificent electronic round of applause. So thank you. I knew you were going to be good, but I mean, you more than lived up to expectations. That was fantastic. Highly entertaining. Yeah, just very inspiring, easy to listen to. And I mean, just shows you don't need fancy slides, just talking for 45 minutes and keeping perfectly to time as well. And I do wonder whether perhaps your next book should be something around, you know, the journey from being a mediocre to an adequate player or something like that. So we look forward to that perhaps. But it's such a privilege for us to hear you combine these passions of your life of bridge and positive psychology. So we've had a lot of questions coming in. So I mean, the BAMSA team have some questions, but I also think there's lots of questions coming in, so we might take some questions from the chat, but we do also want the BAMSA researchers to ask you some questions at some point, but perhaps we should start with some of the early questions that have come in. Perhaps Tracy Bauer, if you can put your mic on, and would you be happy to ask, I think you put in several comments, I quite like your question about negative resting state, seems quite interesting.
Hi, Tracy.
Can we see you? Are you able to put your camera and mic on? Fred, can you help? Oh, sorry, Fred, it's Clifford Tracy Bauer. So Clifford is the first name you'd be looking for.
Yeah, 2 seconds.
Sorry, I forgot that you'll be searching. So just to confuse you.
Okay, Tracy, you'll be able to turn on your camera and mic now.
Hey, good morning. How are you, Marty?
Hi, Tracy.
So, as you know, both of us love our online bridge. We've been playing against each other for years and years and years and years. Yep. So yeah, so it's interesting, you know, my father's son gave me your book 20 years ago about learned optimism. And then we had a child together whose resting state is incredibly negative. So, and that's the thing, is he's a brilliant child, but he's now just getting ready to go off to college, and we have not been able to change the dial from his negative state to a more positive state. And then you have the whole nature versus nurture. I have a daughter who looks at life like I do, half full, and what are the possibilities. And it's interesting to have two different children. And, you know, how did you move your dial?
Well, let me say a few things about that. One of the important things about PERMA is it says there's not just one way to be happy or unhappy. There are 5 ways. And so very often when people describe relentlessly negative children and people, they're talking about P. They're talking about negative emotion, sadness, anxiety, and the like. Indeed, cognitive therapy works about 60% of the time on sadness, anxiety, and anger. But very importantly, not to be forgotten, is ERM&A. So it is perfectly possible to be stuck with negative emotion, but to have hobbies like bridge, which completely engage you. It's possible to have good relationships. Although, by the way, while misery loves company, company does not like misery. So it's not a very good idea socially to be miserable. M, meaning. Very many highly negative people have careers of meaning, journalism, for example, and accomplishment. So one thing I wanted to say, while you may not be able to do much about the negativity, although cognitive therapy may help, not damning him over the P part, but encouraging meaning, engagement, good relationships, and accomplishment in his life are 4 other ways of having well-being. So that's a brief version, but my book, The Hope Circuit,
I just finished it.
Is entirely about my journey from being a miserable, negative person to, well, I'm not a cheerleader or a sunspot. I'm no longer a depressive, anxious, angry person. And I do take my own medicine, and I work on ERM&A a lot in my life. And indeed, Bridge is about A in many ways.
Thanks, Marty.
Welcome, Tracy.
Thank you. We have a question that's related to that from Tunke Alton. If you're there, if you can, Tunke Alton, if you're able to ask your question around negative impact. Can I ask those of you that have been putting hands up to type your question or comment into the chat, please? We want to make the questions kind of link and flow together a bit. So we will be choosing the questions that come in the chat. So is Tunke Alton there, Fred?
Sorry, I'm still trying to find him.
Or if not, Hanoi Rondon.
Yeah.
Hello, Bill.
We have too many people in the audience, Martin. That's the problem, is trying to find them.
Okay, Hanoi can ask now.
Hanoi? I mean, if not, I can ask for you if you don't want to put your mic on.
Yeah, Hanoi's there now, I think.
Yeah. Hi. How are you? Well, I really like the speech by Mr. Selig, and he mentioned some interesting things that I wrote some questions. He says that Sia likes to put the people in flow. Does he mean his partner or his opponents? Also, I also wanted to know about the study he made on Weinstein and Kaplan, and I wanted to know whether those problems that they chose that were automatic and deliberate, could they be found somewhere? And finally, he about the future of bridge, he mentioned that ACBL was not going to be needed anymore. So are MBOs going to stop existing? Those are my questions.
Okay, just for future people coming in, if you could keep it to 1 or 2 questions so that we can get to more people, that would be great.
On the first, there are hands on which your alarm system should go off and drive you out of flow. Something's wrong on this hand. Something's not right. And indeed, I think very fine bridge players try to keep you in flow and keep your alarm system down. But the alarm system is there for a very good reason. It's to break up flow. And so if you ever have the intuition something is not right on this hand, go out of flow and pay attention to that intuition. So that was one of his questions. What were the other 2 questions?
Martin, just before you move on to that though, my understanding of flow is that it's intense concentration and focus. So surely some of the best players in the world have the highest levels of concentration and focus, and when they're in flow, that's what you need in order to not make mistakes. But you're kind of suggesting that it's the other way round, and I would have thought that Zia wants to distract you and get you out of flow so that you're not concentrating and focusing as much as you should do. But that's kind of a different interpretation of flow from you.
Concentration is about deliberation. That's about the non-intuitive part. That's what Eric Rodwell does when he goes into a tank. He actually computes things. Stevie Weinstein, by the way, tells me that he can actually do this visually, and when cards are played, he sees them disappearing from his mental picture. Those of you who are visual bridge players are at a tremendous advantage because the visual system is parallel, and the verbal system, which is what I use, 5, 4, 3, 1, etc. I have to say it to myself. That's serial and the like. But concentration, Samantha, is about deliberation. Flow is about intuition, I think, about the lack of concentration. And the more that you have on automatic, the better a bridge player you are. But you have to have the alarm system go off and tell you now is the time to concentrate. And then you have to have the Weinstein-Rodwellian ability to make use of the concentration.
And I think that was Hanoi's other question, was whether that research you did with Steve and Adam Kaplan is published anywhere.
Oh, we didn't find anything worth publishing, and it cost me $20,000 just to do the 2 brains. So I'm waiting for NIMH to give me $2 million, and then I'll get all of you to come into my fMRI machine and look at your brains as you're playing.
And his third question there was whether we need NBOs in the future, if you say that we don't need the ACBL if the future's online.
Yeah, I don't think local, regional, or national bridge associations are necessary anymore. I think bridge can be genuinely a world event. And
Jean Phelps, are you there? Are you willing to come in and ask? You put lots of comments in the chat, but particularly the question around introverted people. Jean Phelps.
You can turn your mic and camera on, Jean, if you want.
Okay, she says she can't, so I'll read it out. Unless maybe it's possible now, Jean. Okay, her question is, it'll be interesting to hear in contrast from a person who's more on the extrovert side of the emotional side. So from a marketing point of view, will these extroverts be an important market target segment, or is bridge an introverted person's game? So it was about whether there's something there about marketing bridge and targeting it more to introverted people, because you said more introverted people play, or you know, do we need to market bridge in a different way to attract extroverts?
Yeah, I think we definitely should market to introverts. I think, you know, my observation is that the majority of bridge players are introverts, and the majority of bridge players are low positive affective and high negative affective, and that all goes with introversion.
So this links also to Tung K's question, who again wasn't maybe able to put their mic on. They say people are usually sullen when playing bridge. They can spend hours or sometimes even days with this psychology. Could it have a negative impact on their daily life?
When the notion of addiction is a notion of interfering with other functioning in life. And so I think the question to ask yourself about playing bridge is it interfering with the other things you value in life? And if the answer is no, play as much bridge as possible. If it's yes, cut back. And by the way, I'm several times my bridge playing friends and partners have had heart attacks, and they go to a physician and get advice, and the physician often tells them avoid stress. That's a mistake. There are two kinds of stress. There's uncontrollable stress, in which you're helpless, and there's controllable stress, in which you're good at it and you can do things with it. The experience of anxiety itself is indifferent to the cardiovascular system, but what really makes a difference is helplessness or mastery. So my advice to my bridge playing friends after they've had a heart attack is play a lot of bridge, particularly in situations in which you feel mastery playing with it. You might try to avoid playing against people who are so much better as to make you helpless. But if you've had a heart attack, keep playing bridge.
Okay, great. And I think possibly linked to that is Shyamala Reddy's question. Shyamala Reddy, are you able to turn your mic on? Come on, ask your question to Martin.
So how do you spell her name, Sam?
So Shy, Shyamala. I am sending you in a chat, Fred, with the name of the next person, if you can access your chat.
He'd like to read it, I think.
All right, okay.
Okay, so the question is, do you think that there's something about bridge as a game that inherently appeals to low positive effect people, or is it the culture of bridge clubs and organizations? So when you said that sort of a lot of players are grumpy, is it because they're grumpy that they play bridge, or are they made grumpy by the culture of bridge clubs and organizations?
Well, I don't think it's the culture of bridge clubs, but the question of which comes first is a good question, and I don't know the answer to it. Are negatively affected people attracted to bridge, or does bridge make you negatively affective? My hunch is that those of us who are low positive affectives are attracted to bridge. But for me, it's largely because it has A, achievement, and E, engagement, that attracts me as a low positive affective, because achievement and engagement are things I seek in life.
So I think there's a similar question to that from Ko Lu Wen, but I don't know if you'll be able to turn your mic on.
One second.
And then after that, we maybe come to Esme Nicholson.
Okay, go off you go.
Hi. So yeah, I played bridge for about 12 years. So I normally when I'm in my MBO, I see that bridge players can be quite grumpy. Doesn't matter whether at a social level or at a tournament level, but they also happen to be quite smart, even if they are casual. So is there some kind of innate connection or kind of causation between smart and grumpy? Like if that's the first part. Second part is if there is a connection, then is it because we generally can't tolerate stupid nonsense, or is it because we know that like we're so smart, like we know that so many things in life that we want to control but we couldn't, and that kind of like creates a negative effect on our outlook on life. Yeah.
I think we know the answer to that. There's no relationship of IQ to introversion or extroversion. So IQ is independent of introversion, extroversion, grumpiness, non-grumpiness. They're independent dimensions. So smart people are not necessarily grumpy and low positive affective.
That's positive to hear.
And Esme Nicholson.
Hello. Mine is possibly a very stupid question, but I'm just wondering if people tend to enjoy playing more if they're playing with people who are playing for the same reason. So if they're both playing for pleasure, do they enjoy playing together more? Or is it that people playing for pleasure can actually enjoy it just as much when they're playing with someone who's playing for meaning, for instance?
Well, that's not a stupid question at all. I don't know the answer to that. Very good empirical question, and that is, does bridge go better if you're an E person, if you're playing with another E person? I don't know the answer to that. Good question, Esme.
And Diana Lack.
Diana, you can turn on your mic and camera if you want.
If you sample bridge problems that were supposed to be automatic and some that deliver.
Maybe the sound's not so great there, Diana. I think what she was asking for was samples of auto bridge problems and deliberative bridge problems, the automatic problems and the deliberative problems. Do you have examples of those?
Yes, and it depends on what level you're playing at. So if you have Jack third opposite Ace Queen fourth, it's automatic to play low to the Queen, and so that at a intermediate level is automatic. Deliberative one, just last night, Mark Lair, who has almost everything on automatic, had let's see if I got it right. And he got this right. Oh, I'm sorry. It's the question of Ace third opposite Queen 10-9 6. What's the right way of playing that suit with unlimited entries? I thought it was queen up to the ace, but it's not. And Mark sat there for 5 minutes and got it right. Chip, for someone like Chip or Jill, that's probably automatic. For me, that's deliberative. On bidding, for example, 5-card major, 15 to 17 points. Do you automatically open one no trump, or do you deliberate and think about the textures of the suit and open one of a 5-card major with 15 to 17? For me, it's automatic. For some people, it's deliberative. I always open one no trump. But
so
then you have to have a system to cope with a 5-card major.
We may have lost a few of the academics who just got a bit confused there about the bridge talk, but that's fair enough, because sometimes I think when we have academic discussions, we might lose some of the bridge players. So it's a reciprocal agreement. I just actually had a question for you, because I know lots of your work is about what makes life worth living, and you mentioned that right at the start of your talk. And you also mentioned that you didn't think many people would play bridge because of meaning. But do you think that there would be some that played because of meaning? Because, you know, when you ask these questions of non-bridge players, what kinds of things do they say that gives them meaning? And how do you think that would be similar or different to bridge players talking about meaning through playing bridge?
Well, I think it's rare. I can think of examples. So I have 7 children, and I've tried to teach them to play bridge, to have better relations with them and more meaningful relations with them. So if you're teaching someone to play bridge, that might be a meaning endeavor. Or if you're like Samantha or me and you do research on bridge and cognition, that's meaning. But it is a game. And a lot of the reason I chose psychology rather than bridge at age 21, bridge was more intellectually stimulating than psychology. At that time, there were more bridge journals. They were just as good as psychology journals. But the difference for me was that bridge was a game and could never lead to meaning. But psychology, which I was also better at, was not a game.
And any regrets that you went down that route rather than the pro route?
No, none at all. I really was not a good enough bridge player to be a pro. And it's only at age 78 that I've become comfortable sitting with professionals.
We have a question from Miriam Snellgrove.
Hi, sorry. Can I actually follow on from your last question that you just said there, Marty, about the fact that bridge is a game?
Yeah.
Because this morning earlier today, we had a very lively discussion about where bridge was situated between mind sports and leisure activities. And I'm just curious if you think it matters how we refer to bridge in terms of trying to get bridge more widely known on government agendas, getting more people engaged in it, whether we think of it as a mind sport or a leisure activity or a game.
Oh, it's definitely a mind sport. And I should say something about why it's such an important mind sport. So about 4 years ago, some version of Google in Beijing was able to beat the great Go players. And as you know, in chess now, it's routine for the computers to beat the world's best chess players. Now, it's very interesting that's not the case in bridge. There are some things that computers do faster and better than even people at my level, but I don't think the computers can beat us. And the reason for that is that bridge is numerically much more complicated than chess or Go. Both chess and Go are path independent. You only need to see the board at any given moment to plan for the future. You don't care how it got into that position. Bridge is path dependent. That is, you have to take into account how you got into that position. You have to generate hypotheses about what's going on in your opponent's minds, and it got them to that position. So bridge is, for me, far and away the most complicated and challenging of the mind sports.
Can I be cheeky and ask one more further thing then? How would you, because part of BAMS's goal is to get bridge, more widely known and played in schools and more people playing. So how would you go about getting governments and other funding bodies to take bridge and all its wonderful things that you've just highlighted seriously?
I don't know how to do it, but I think on the one hand, the schools, having it taught in the schools, there's so many tempting video games which don't take nearly the intelligence or concentration that bridge does. And then what Mark Malesa is doing with older people and getting bridge into the nursing homes, into dementia, and into retirement communities. So I think those are our two best weapons, but a lot of this is political. We don't have politicians who play bridge. Would that Dwight Eisenhower was still around.
Thank you. And Paul Brereton, are you able to ask your question?
Yes, and thanks very much, Samantha and Martin. It's been great. I'm actually an academic, not a psychologist, but I'm at Queen's University Belfast. But this is by far the best web conference I've been in for a long time, probably because I'm a bridge player. But I've actually got two questions. One was, I think you've almost answered, but my biggest fear being a bridge player is that the beauty and mystery of the game will be eventually taken over by computers, as it has in chess. But I think you've sort of addressed that, but I do worry about that time when supercomputers actually can do better than we can. But the other question was, like you, I think, I listened to bridge players post-mortems and all these people going on about their successes, and I only remember my failures. So even yesterday, I was playing yesterday, I'm talking about the hand that I misplayed. Why is that?
Yes, it's a great regularity of psychology. It's been known for almost 100 years that the mind looks for what's wrong. And the mind is like the tongue 24 hours a day swishes around your mouth looking for a cavity. And when it finds it, it worries it. It sits there. It doesn't swish around looking for a really great tooth. And consciousness is the same thing. Consciousness, for good evolutionary reasons, doesn't glory in successes. Rather, it looks for what you did wrong, and that worries it. So if you come to my laboratory, Paul, and I give you 20 anagrams to solve, and you solve 19 of them, the one you're going to remember is the one you didn't solve. So it's just a regularity of mind.
But why do some bridge players?
I should say, by the way, in positive psychology, one of the exercises we do is have people remember and think more about things that go well, because that does not come naturally. What comes naturally is worrying.
Why is it that some just talk about their successes, even if they're not successful bridge players? They always talk about their successes. I don't know.
Yes, that has to do with Kleos, I think. With, glory.
Anyway, great to listen to you. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Paul.
Christina Ballinger. Christina Ballinger, if you're there.
Yes, hi, Martin. Thanks so much. It was a fascinating talk. Martin, if there was one study that you think could be undertaken in an ideal world to make a link, a scientific link between playing bridge and happiness, would you be able to describe that study?
Um, I don't, the reason I divided well-being into 5 different elements, PERMA, is because I don't think there's a link between bridge and happiness. Rather, I think for different people, there's a link between bridge and positive emotion, bridge and engagement, bridge and relationships, bridge and accomplishment, and bridge and meaning. So for me, there's no such study. But the one study we really need to invest in is the dementia study that Marek Melisa is doing. That's really very suggestive. And the idea that teaching demented people bridge will prevent or delay dementia is very plausible. His data is intriguing, and it's worth several $1 million. If I controlled the ACBL's charity account now, I would give the whole thing to Marek.
And don't forget a little bit of Bamsa. Anyway, I'm conscious of time because we do have a book launch in the last part of this, but it has been a fabulous time with you, Martin. I mean, as Paul said just there, I mean, it's been one of the most engaging and insightful and fun and entertaining sessions that, you know, academics could have at a conference like this. So we're hugely appreciative that you gave up your bridge to be with us today. I am aware that there's been some questions we didn't get to. In particular, there's some questions about cheating, but we do have a session dedicated to cheating tomorrow. So we will pick up on some of those questions and issues tomorrow at the session on cheating. But just to say thank you once again, Professor Martin Seligman. That was truly inspirational. Thank you. And to everyone now, I would just like to say that we're going to take a few minutes break. We'll only take maybe about 3-minute break, and we will come back to speak with world champions Jill Levin and Chip Martell. So see you in about 3 minutes. And thanks again, Martin. That was superb.
Well, welcome back, everybody. I hope you managed to grab a cup of tea. We're now going to move into the launch of Bridge at the Top, Behind the Screens by Samantha Punch. If any of you have read it, we'd love to hear from you. Please put your comments in the chat. It's warm off the press, just published in the last month or so. So we have some very special guests today. We have Sam with us, and we also have the publisher of the book, Ray Lee of Masterpoint Press. And we have two multiple bridge world champions. We have Jill Levin with us today. She has won 5 world titles. And Chip Martell, who's won 7 titles. And to those of you in the audience, if you've got questions about the book, questions you'd like to ask of any of our guests, please put them in chat, and we shall do our very best to answer as many of your questions as we can before the end of the session. So this time last year, I helped Sam prepare the manuscript before it went to the publisher. It was a fascinating experience, proofreading interviews with 25 of the greatest living bridge players. In their own words, top players shared their thoughts on bridge play and on what it takes to be a champion. Whether you are a beginner, teacher, or a tournament player, there is plenty to learn from the book. These are intimate portraits. These top players speak frankly and honestly in response to questions that Sam put to them that were personal and probing. And what a relief it is to know that even the world's top players sometimes lose their cool with themselves and, God forbid, with their partners. So when Sam asked me to introduce today's book launch, I was really pleased for 2 reasons. And first of all, it's a great book, and I have no hesitation in recommending it to everyone here. But I was pleased for a second reason, because it gives me an opportunity to pay tribute to Sam, because the first book is a landmark for any author, and I'm sure that there'll be many more to come from Sam. Sam is an academic and an author, and she plays bridge for Scotland. She's also a passionate advocate for the benefits of bridge. And without Sam's vision, energy, and leadership, we wouldn't be sitting here all together today. And I'm sure that you will all join me in congratulating Sam now, not only for the publication of her first book, but also for the many other achievements that she's brought about, including this week's international conference. So we're going to hear from Sam in a few minutes, but first I have a question to put to Ray Lee. Ray, you and your wife Linda have built Masterpoint Press into the world's largest publisher of books about bridge. You, of all people, must see many, many manuscripts land on your desk. So what was it about this manuscript that made you think, yes, this book deserves to be published?
Well, it's a unique book, as I'm sure you know. We published a book many years ago called World Class by Mark Smith, which was a series of interviews again, but the focus was different. But again, it gave you some insight into how you get to be a top player and what it takes to be a top player, which is a great deal more than just technical ability. Yes, you have to have that, but it's about preparation, approach, attitude, experience, lots and lots of other things. So you learn that in this book. It's a book that actually makes a great follow-up to one we published a couple of years ago by an Australian international, Kim Fraser, called Gaining the Mental Edge at Bridge. And the interesting thing about Kim was that she was an Olympic competitor in a physical sport, in shooting, and had won Commonwealth gold medals and so forth. And she talked about how those attitudes and that preparation applied to bridge as well, that it moved over from the physical sport to the mind sport. Now, the big bonus with this book for anybody who reads it, and it's a great read anyway, is that all the players interviewed in it give you a couple of tips, and 1 or 2 tips. And those are things that everyone can apply to their own game. And I'm not saying that reading this book is going to make you a world champion, but if everybody could take away from the book 3 or 4 of those tips and apply them to their own game, they're certainly going to be a better player. And that's what we try to do with all our books. We're hoping to help people become better players and enjoy themselves along the line.
Thank you. Thanks, Lee. So Ray, sorry. And so a question for you, Sam. You've spent nearly a decade studying elite bridge players. So why is this research important?
Well, it's where BAMSA started. And one of the reasons that I started at the top is because so little is known about the elite world of bridge, particularly outside the bridge community, but even within it. And I think certainly most non-bridge players don't realise that an elite level of bridge exists. And I also think that by studying those at the top, you get a great understanding of the skills that can be developed through playing and of the commitment and dedication that's required. And also just many of us find it fascinating to hear about their journey to the top of the game and the challenges that they've faced along the way. So as you said yourself, it's reassuring to hear that even the best struggle with controlling their emotions at times. I think I remember a phrase from Chip in the book about falling from grace sometimes, and I would consider Chip one of the sort of best behaved players at the table, but he admitted he has his moments too. So, and I think as well as being insightful by interviewing the best players, it also really does help to shift the stereotypical images of bridge that people have.
Thank you. And Sam, what is the link between bridge at the top and bridge as a mind sport?
Well, I mean, they're completely aligned. As I said, this is where BAMSA started, and the book has 25 of the 52 interviews that were done with top players. And it was very much aimed at a bridge audience. So the book is for bridge players, because if an academic read it who's not a bridge player, they're going to get lost. But then on the other hand, I've used that interview data from all 52 players, and we've analysed that in depth through the series of academic papers that we're doing. We have 4 already published and we have another 4 in preparation. So for BAMSA to have 8 academic papers and a book is a really strong basis to sort of set out the academic exploration of partnership and team dynamics. So it's fueled certainly my inspiration and my motivation to develop the BAMSA work. And in future, we're going to be interviewing and talking with players of all ages and all levels. But I think starting at the top is a great place to start, because it really does give that case study of what goes on at the table. So for BAMSA, I mean, BAMSA wouldn't have existed if I hadn't started it by interviewing my bridge heroes.
Great. Thank you. So I'm now going to hand over to you, Sam, to introduce our special guests, Jill Levin and Chip Martell.
Okay, yes, we're delighted that they can be with us today. They're both from the US, so I think it's fairly early in the morning for them to be joining us. And just some short introductions. Chip Martell is a retired professor of computer science. He's now, well, I think maybe you call yourself a professional bridge player. He's won 7 world titles, including 4 Bermuda Bowl wins, and has numerous other national titles. And for more than 3 decades, he played with the same partner, Lou Stansby. And I must admit, that was something that I found quite intriguing. shocking how someone could play with someone for that many decades. And Jill Levin has won 5 World Championships and again, numerous North American titles in women's events. When she was a student lawyer, she led a legal action against the American Contract Bridge League. And her contention was that by holding some men-only events, the ACBL was denying women the right to play at the highest level. And the lawsuit was resolved when the ACBL then replaced its men-only events with open events. And of course, that, as a sociologist who's interested in gender and bridge, that was just a fascinating story for me to hear more about. So yeah, so I'm delighted to have both of them here today. And well, it is a number of years ago now, because these things in academia always take a long time to actually end up coming out in print. So it's a few years ago now that I interviewed you both. I just would like to start by asking you, can you remember what it was like to be interviewed at length about bridge? And maybe we start with Chip first.
So I must confess that I only have vague memories of it. Sam, I do remember a little bit. I've actually been interviewed several times, so this one was a more extensive and in-depth one. I mean, I know that generally I have to say I'm fine to talk about myself, and the questions were interesting, so caused me to think about some things I maybe hadn't thought about in such detail before.
Can you give us an example of that, maybe?
Well, I think some of the things about the gender issues, and also what things it takes to be a good bridge player. So.
And Jill, can you remember when we got together for your interview?
I remember that I did the interview because keeping bridge alive is actually something that I am very concerned about, because I see all the ways that it's important, from the older people at the club that have a built-in support system and they're a place to go, to the younger people who were horrible students and had no direction in life and suddenly found the ability to learn, which is important for anything. So for a long time, I was there. And unlike Chip, I don't do a lot of interviews. I did this one because I trusted you, Sam, to pick up the gauntlet and really run with it. And I'm very glad that I did. So I expected it to be a lot about my lawsuit and women in bridge. You asked a lot of more probing questions. One in particular about playing with my husband. I regret my answer when I saw it on print, because for some reason I emphasized how hard it was. And really, he deserves so much more credit than I gave him for the amazing player he is, how he's taught me so much, how he's worked really hard on all of my partnerships, and just been incredibly supportive at every turn of my bridge career, which isn't always easy for another person to do.
Yeah.
So.
And I think you've both read some of the other chapters in the book, so it'll be quite interesting to hear your thoughts about what struck you most when you read others' accounts of Bridge at the Top. So maybe Jill, you could go first this time.
I would say the thing that struck me most was the number of players that talked about speed, and that they like to play fast because they catch their opponents unawares, and how one feels about that tactic. For me personally, not being the natural player of a Bobby or a Mexroth or some of the other players that spoke about speed, I need to be incredibly deliberative. So that will never be an arrow in my, that I have to work with when I'm trying to succeed at bridge. I was shocked that so many people even admitted to that. That's something that they do. So.
And just to follow up from that, given what Martin was just saying about flow, is flow something that you experience at the table or not necessarily? When he was talking about flow and...
I would say that through the years, many things have become more automatic to me than they used to be, just like with Martin. But I also think that I have to continue my deliberative process so that I make sure that things that I would think would be automatic are not, and I don't stumble over myself making the mistake that I know exactly what to do here. So.
And Chip, how about you? Sorry.
No, that's
so I was struck somewhat by the variety of different backgrounds and things that people came from, though almost all of them started playing young. At least I've read maybe a bit more than half the interviews so far. And I was also struck a bit that when you, to the extent you asked about it, nobody expressed any regrets for having taken up bridge. So the thing, I guess, Martin in his lecture talked a little bit about addiction and saying that if it's something that's taking away from things that you wish you had more time from, maybe you should cut back. But I certainly didn't see any of that coming through in any of the interviews. I don't know if you remember anything where anyone said that?
About people
having regrets about taking up bridge or the amount of time it takes in their life?
I mean, people did talk about enjoying their time off. So some of the full-time pros in particular said they quite like the balance of the intensity sometimes of playing a lot of bridge, but then also you do go for stretches when you don't play and you are at home for a bit of a stretch. So I think they appreciated that when they were at home with the family, they really were there because they didn't have other distractions. But when they were away working and playing bridge, then so it was kind of a nice divide between the two, rather than other people that I think juggle work and home and family life simultaneously. For professional bridge players on the road, then they have that separation. When they're home, and when they're away, and that's the difficult part. I think some of them did talk about that could be difficult being on the road for a long time. I mean, how do you two feel about that being, I mean, obviously not the last 15 months, but prior to lockdown, there's a lot of travel obviously involved in bridge. How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, it's both a good and bad things. When I was working full time, it was often complicated, and I didn't get to take as much advantage of the travel since I sort of had to leave at the last minute and return as soon as possible to not be away for too long. But now that I'm retired, the travel sort of gives us an opportunity to go and visit places and do some sightseeing and have an excuse to be places. So we're looking forward to maybe starting to do that again.
And Jill, how about you? With prior to lockdown and the travel involved in bridge, is that something you enjoy, or do you find it tiresome at times?
I think that I used to enjoy it a lot more. I feel like I saw a lot of the cities that I really wanted to see through bridge. I've also seen a lot of cities that I never wanted to see through bridge and would be happy to never go back to them. I also was raising children, so like Chip, I had limited time to spend exploring those places. I was pretty much getting in the bare minimum of days so that I could be ready to play and leaving the second it was over to get back to my children. So
I'd just like to encourage at this point anybody to type some questions for either Ray, the publisher, or Chip or Jill. Type some questions of what you'd like to know about bridge at the top. But meanwhile, we will continue while you're coming up with some. So another question that I wanted to ask you both was whether any of your views have changed since we did the interview. Is there anything perhaps we didn't cover that you would like to have said more about that you haven't already mentioned, or has anything is anything different now compared to back then? So perhaps Chip, do you want to go first?
A couple of things that I don't think really changed too much, but a couple of things I didn't really talk about. One is that for me it was very useful when I was learning that I had access to better and more experienced players who were willing to listen to my questions and at times play with me. That one of the things about bridge is that often you can do something that works really badly, but it doesn't necessarily mean you did something wrong. So being able to talk to someone and get their view of whether what you did was stupid or just unlucky is very important, I think, to becoming a better player. And books aren't necessarily useful for that. The other thing is that for me, stamina and rest are really important. And for me, when I play bridge, I get very wired and it's hard for me to sleep. And dealing with that is something that really has an impact on the quality of my play. Perhaps partly getting back to what Martin was talking about, that and like Jill, I definitely have to be able to analyze things to play well. If I'm too tired, I can't do that well.
I think probably a lot of us can relate to that, of the difficulty of getting to sleep after you've had a trying day at the bridge table. Jill, is there anything that you didn't cover in the interview that you'd like to have said, or that views that have changed?
I would say I'm more encouraged by where women's bridge is now than I was at the time that I did the interview. I bemoaned the fact that it was very hard for women that had won 1 million world championships to get into the Hall of Fame. And since that time, both Lynn Diaz and Judy Radin have gotten into the Hall of Fame. And I spoke personally about how hard it was for me to make the crossover to being hired in open events as opposed to women's events. And since then, a lot more women have been hired for open events. So there's progress. It's slow, but there's progress.
Yeah, I think there's a related question there from Tracy Bauer. I think just because we've got limited time, it's probably easier if maybe I read it out. But she's asked, what do you think are the solutions to the bridge gap between the sexes at the highest level? So what are the solutions to trying to get bridge to be more gender equal at the top? And what can we implement now to make a difference in the future?
Is that directed at me?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay.
And she also, just to warn Chip, she's also asking about, could you elaborate a bit more on the gender issues that you found interesting in the book? So we'll go with Jill first.
I think a lot of the change is going to come from changing division of labor in a household with raising children. I can speak to my son, Shane Blanchard, and his wife, Sandra Rimstedt, and she demands of him, and he has embraced being a fully equal partner in the raising of their children. In my lifetime, feminist as I may have been, I was still the primary person when something would go wrong and a child needed to be picked up or taken to the doctor. That was on me. I think that has changed a lot and is going to continue to change, and that will change some of the gap in the ability to focus versus the ability to multitask. And obviously, the ability to focus is a huge part of success at bridge. I also think my generation of women on grew up thinking that we're not going to be shoved off to the side as being different or not capable of doing things that boys and men do, and that will also make a difference. Structurally, I don't see that much difference.
Yeah, and Chip, you want to chip in there?
Yeah, I would certainly endorse what Jill said. I think when she was talking about that, I was thinking back to how when I went to my first world championship, I was gone for about 2 weeks while Jan was staying home looking after our son. So, that was a thing where I had the opportunity because there was someone else who could do it. And of course, at that time, there was almost no communication. So I was really mostly out of touch with what was going on in terms of the family back home.
And we have a question here from Paul Brereton. Can you imagine your life without bridge, and what would have replaced it? And we'll ask the same of you, Ray, just to bring you into the conversation.
Oh, it's really hard for me to say. I mean, I started playing seriously in high school, so it's been such a big part of my life for, even before I became an adult. So I can't quite imagine what really would have been there instead.
And Jill?
Bridge was always going to be a huge part of my life. My mother is a multi-world champion. My father is a national champion. And whether I ever picked up a deck of cards or not, I was surrounded by bridge. It's turned out that it's become a family reunion at every nationals. My brothers, my sister, we all go to the nationals. Even my sister, who doesn't particularly play bridge, goes to the nationals. So I was destined.
I think that's one of the reasons why we found it quite hard to find a time to get together, because you kept having your family reunions when you weren't playing bridge, so it was hard to pin you down. And Ray, if you have bridge in your life?
Yeah, before I was a bridge player, I was a chess player, and I don't know, I guess I'd have probably just stuck at that if I hadn't learned to play bridge and got interested. But my life would have been very different because I met my wife playing bridge. And so I certainly wouldn't have had the same last, 48, 49 years that I have had.
Well, I think everyone's got that in common here. So
yes.
That's the relationships that Martin was talking about. So clearly is a central part of playing bridge for many people. Mm-hmm. We have a related question there from Jean Phelps. How did you know you were ready to play professionally? Was that a goal or something that one day you realized you could play professionally? Did it become your main source of income, or was it a side job? So Jill?
I realized I could play professionally the first time somebody offered to pay me. Other than that, I'm a lawyer and I expected to go back to practicing law. But then my mother opened a bridge club. I agreed to help her with that, and it just became easier to combine being a mother and a bridge player and making money by pursuing professional bridge.
And Chip?
I guess I have to say I really don't particularly consider myself to be a bridge pro. That for me, I more got pushed into doing it because in order to play on the best teams, almost all the top pairs were being hired. So I couldn't really have an amateur team that was going to be as strong as playing on a professional team. So if I could play on an equal or stronger team and get paid for it, but it was always really, for me, not my main job.
And Barry asks a related question about
in the national tournaments and an occasional other tournament.
Sorry, I think we overlapped there. But Barry asks a related question about what are the variety of ways to make money at bridge, besides ACBL administrative roles. What other ways can you make money apart from being paid to play? Well, Ray, maybe you should go first on this one.
Sorry, finally got unmuted. I would be the last person in the world ever to suggest that you should get into book publishing if you're trying to make a living or trying to make money. There are a lot of old jokes about that, but we don't have time to go into them. But I mean, obviously, bridge journalism is one of them. We all know a number of people who make a reasonable living and career out of that. Most of them play as well professionally. I can't think of too many people who are just bridge journalists, and that gives them enough to live a decent lifestyle. I would say, from my point of view, from what I've seen, the top professionals are the people who make the money out of the game, and most of the rest of us, if we can make a living, fine.
And Jill?
I've done a lot of teaching, and working at the Bridge Club was another source of income. And my mother's written books, and she makes money doing that. But I think most people that make a lot of money at bridge probably could have made a lot of money doing something else. Not everyone. There are the savants that not clear what they could do, but we're a group of people that probably had another way to make money, but chose this because it's the love of the game.
And I guess one of your more recent roles, being an NPC, a non-playing captain, is that another option? Or is there not much work in that line of things?
I don't think anybody could say that being an NPC is a career choice. It's something that I fell into. It was partially because I enjoy being a team rooter, just like I love the New York Mets. I get to root for the nickel team and be a part of it and feel like in my own little way of bringing coffee and pistachio nuts or over-the-counter medicines, it sort of satisfies the mother hen in me, and at the same time gives me a strong feeling of belonging with that team. And it also freed me up to spend a lot of time with my grandchildren at the Nationals, which became very important to me.
Okay, great. We have one more question, but I think, Ray, you might need to leave. So we'll just say thank you to Ray Lee at this point, and also particular thanks to him because he's donated 4 copies of Bridge at the Top to the 2 winning pairs tomorrow in tomorrow's conference pairs tournament. So thanks again, Ray, for that.
My pleasure, Sam.
If you need to go, that's fine. And a final question then for perhaps for Jill and Chip. Bill Kubley asks about slow play and says that is it the case that he feels that some people play slowly as a kind of tactic, and he just wondered if you had anything to say about that.
I just had an argument yesterday with Bobby. We were discussing some post on bridge winners about how long it's okay for somebody to take before they make a suit preference signal, and make it obvious that it's a suit preference signal as opposed to the only logical card they could have played in their hand, and what that imposes on their partner as far as unauthorized information. And my point to him was that he's the natural and he sees everything so quickly. And if he took a long time, maybe you could draw an inference from it. From me, I would still be thinking about whether it could possibly cost me a trick if I throw this 7 out there as a suit preference card or not. So I don't necessarily think it's a tactic. I think it's a difference in the way people process the hand and how they go about trying to beat a contract, succeed in a contract, or things like that.
Yeah, and Chip?
Well, I somewhat echo what Joe's saying in that I think that perhaps there are some who do that, but I think most people who play slowly do it because they just feel they need the time to figure out what's the best thing to do. And I think that perhaps that still can be impolite to the other players when it takes too long and can obviously cause issues to the smooth running of a tournament. You know, I get a lot of that since my wife Jan is the administrator these days, so she has to deal with the consequences. Slow play disrupting the tournament.
Well, we haven't had too much of a chance to talk about the global pandemic and bridge, but that is the focus of tomorrow's session. So we'll hopefully be able to pick up some of those discussions then. I'd have a couple of final closing slides, but just to say at this point, a huge thank you to both of you for coming all this way to sunny Scotland to share your views of Bridge at the Top with us. So that, I guess, is one of the advantages of now going into a digital environment, is that we can interact like this in this kind of forum and have these sorts of discussions. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Sam, for all you're doing.
Yeah, really appreciate the
So I just want to finish with a couple of slides just to remind you how you can support BAMSA and your participation at the conference this week. We have Padlet, which is our electronic comments board. The link will be going into the chat, so do put your comments in there. Subscribe to the BAMSA bulletin to get updates 3 times a year. Be active on social media. And if you're enjoying the conference, please do consider a donation towards the Keep Bridge Alive crowdfunder, and proceeds from the screening of Aces and Knaves also go towards BAMSA's work. If you watch the BAMSA screening about the highs and lows of bridge, that's available until the 11th of July. Again, the links to these should be going into the chat. And just a heads up for what's happening tomorrow. So we have Pandemic Bridge first up, and then we have our conference pairs tournament on Real Bridge. There's still time to sign up, but you do need to sign up before the end of the day. And then in the evening, well, or wherever your time zone is, later on in the day, the third session of the day, we're going to have a lively discussion about digital bridge and cheating. And I can guarantee that's going to be quite a session with the panel, because there's lots of questions have already come in today about cheating, so I think that should be a lively debate. And then on Wednesday we move into picking up of some of the topics that were discussed there with Jill and Chip around gender and bridge, but also age and intergenerationality in the bridge community. So thanks everyone for your participation. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you more tomorrow.